أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى اللهم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this second edition of our fledgling series called Book Corner, in which we are, during this period where coronavirus has probably kept more of us at home and given us a little bit more time to think about what we want to be doing over this period of isolation and sometimes even quarantine. And when there's a plethora and availability of great books that are out there for you and I to be able to get stuck into, the idea was for us to be able to invite on authors of some of the books that we have available to us, especially in our own community, and to think about how we can learn from the authors, get a bit of inspiration from them as to why they've taken time to be able to pen these books, and to hear directly from them as to how the books have actually been an inspiration to so many people, get insights directly from them. Last week we had Dr. Ali Al-Hilli on, and we spoke to him about his book 101 Ways to Concentrate in Salah. And if you recall, the education team at Hujjat Stanmore is offering free postage and packaging for anyone who wants to be able to purchase that book. The idea is to be able to inspire them during their Salah, help them to achieve even more concentration and spirituality. And so you can review that session on our YouTube page, or you can also, if you wish to be able to purchase the book, email education@hujjat.org, and they will be able to send you out a copy with free postage and packaging, inshallah. So this week, our second week, we are honored to have with us Sister Nazmina Dhanji, a person who I personally consider to be a teacher and a guide, and someone who has helped me in many circumstances to be able to understand my own trying or journeying through the Islamic tradition. And so I wish to be able to welcome her, and then just to continue on with the introduction about some of the things that we're doing, and then we'll go straight into the topic of her book. Assalamu alaikum, sister. Thank you so much for joining us.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. I know that you're several weeks away from giving birth, inshallah, to your fourth child. So inshallah. I can imagine that this must be, something that you're having to shift a lot around to be able to help us. So we're genuinely appreciative for taking time out of your busy schedule to be able to participate with us this afternoon. So the idea behind this series is not only for us to be able to learn from the authors of these great books directly, but it's also to encourage you at home to do your own book reviews, especially for the kids and the children, especially for youths. We want to be able to hear from you. So if you've read a book that you want to recommend to the rest of the community, we'd like you at home to be able to make a short clip, 5 minutes long, send them into av@hujjat.org. That's av@hujjat.org, and we will play them so that our whole community can benefit from your own readings and your own reflections and insights into the books that you have been participating in. The second thing that we want to remind all of our audience is that we're actually running this live and interactive, which means that we have on Slido the opportunity to get feedback from you. We also have polls that we're going to be making available. So certain questions that we've come up with, we want to know your opinions on. Those polls will be available as we are going through the discussion. I will let you know when those polls are live, and we also invite questions from the audience, which we'll then put to Sister Nazmina, and she will be able to answer your questions as well, inshallah. So before we begin, I'm going to read a verse of the Quran, inshallah, which might have some reflection to the topic of the book that we're going to be talking about, and then we'll bring in Sister Nazmina, inshallah. So the verse I'm going to read from is chapter number 46 of the Quran, Surah Al-Ahqaf, verse number 15. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the following, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ إِحْسَانًا حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ كُرَهًا ووضعته كرها وحمله وفصاله 30 شهرا حتى إذا بلغ أشده وبلغ 40 سنة قال ربي أوزعني أن أشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علي وعلى والدي وأن أعمل صالحا ترضاه وأصلح لي في ذريتي إني تبت إليك وإني من المسلمين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and we have enjoined upon mankind to his parents good treatment. His mother carried him with hardship and gave birth to him with hardship, and his gestation and weaning period is 30 months. He grows until he reaches maturity and reaches the age of 40 years. He says, my Lord, enable me to be grateful for your favor which you have bestowed upon me and upon my parents, and to work righteousness of which you will approve, and to make righteous for me my offspring. Indeed, I have repented to you, and indeed, I am of the Muslims. Sadaqallahu al-Aliyyul Azim. Sister Nazmina, thank you so much for joining us. We are discussing this wonderful book, incredibly insightful, 50 Quranic Comforts for Mums, and it is available at the Hujjat bookshop, and also if you wish to be able to email us at education@hujjat.org, then inshallah we will also be able to get a copy out to you. So I wanted to start by just asking you to introduce yourself to us. I know you're no stranger to the community, but it may be that there's a first-time watcher amongst us. If you can just introduce your own background and your own studies so we can get a flavor of you as a person as well, inshallah.
Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So yes, I've grown up in the community. I've grown up at Hujjat, and my studies have been primarily in Arabic. So my degree was in the Arabic language and literature, and I currently specialize in Quranic Arabic. So I teach Quranic Arabic, and I also teach at Al-Mahdi Institute in Birmingham, Quranic Sciences and Hadith Studies. And I work also as a translator, so I've translated many books up until now from Arabic into English, mainly Islamic books, but this was my first venture into actually writing one. So yeah, that's...
MashaAllah. So full disclosure, I consider you my teacher, and that's not me saying it just as something honorific, but what I mean by is genuinely stating that. So I have taken a course with you as being a student of yours, and also the book that you translated on Ilm al-Hadith, Sciences of Hadith Studies, which I recall Dr. Abdul Fadli, is that correct?
That's right, Abdul Hadi al-Fadli.
Ahsantum. So your translation of that work, I remember being in Karbala and studying there, and we're studying that text, and we open it, and actually it specifically mentions your translation of that work into English. So it gives our audience an insight as to the accomplishments and how well-rounded you are in your areas of expertise. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you more tawfiq, inshallah, and whatever more opportunities that you have to serve, may it be accepted, and inshallah we can all benefit from them. So this book of 50 Quranic comforts for mums, I know you talk about it in the introduction, but can you tell us, for those of us who may not have had the opportunity to read the book yet, what inspired you to write this book? What were the processes that you had to take in actually going through this? One of the questions we've already had for you, which is pertinent, is how were you able to dedicate time to writing a book whilst raising 3 children?
So firstly, I'll answer that question kind of in the process of answering yours. I'd say the inspiration for the book came primarily from the Quran, in that before I even decided to, think about writing a book or anything like that, alhamdulillah, I've had a habit of kind of journaling the Quran, or like when I read it after Fajr in the mornings, almost kind of looking for my answers in it. Maybe I read into it, and maybe I read what I want to, find for my day ahead. But it's worked for me. And at the time, and this is kind of going back about 5 years ago or so, I had 3 children under the age of 12, and parenting was difficult, and I would find a lot of solace in the Quran, and and look for answers in the Quran. So I'd be reading it kind of with a parenting lens and finding kind of hope and encouragement and anything to kind of help me get through my day. So I had this habit of looking at the Quran. So the inspiration primarily was there. The idea of writing a parenting book actually came from my good friend and publisher Desin Merali, of Sun Behind the Cloud Publications. So back in October 2016, she said, "Oh, let's, how about we write an Islamic parenting book?" And I was like, "Wow, great idea, but don't look at me." I didn't feel at all that that I could write a book in parenting. I felt like I was winging it with my own children, and that families were so different, all the children are so different. I couldn't possibly advise in an Islamic parenting book about, I don't know, introducing solids or disciplining or whatever it was. So I kind of just sat on it, and she just put it out there. And then, and about a year later in 2017, I agreed to her that I would make something of that journaling of mine. And maybe by sharing my own experiences, not really putting advice out there or advocating to be an expert on parenting or anything, actually, maybe it would help somebody. Then I sat on it for another year. Laylatul Qadr 2018, alhamdulillah, I had the tawfiq to properly put pen and paper and start formally writing it, kind of in a coherent way, not just jots. And then it was published, alhamdulillah, last year, Ramadan 2019. So it kind of just evolved from what were initially just notes. And to me, it was really important that it come across as a book where I was simply sharing my understandings and not kind of advocating advice or preaching or anything like that, because the kind of books that had had a profound impact on my life were always the ones where the authors, again, it was anecdotes from their life or experiences. So I remember, for example, Marhum Mullah Asghar, I was a prisoner of Saddam's, that one having an impact. Or The Elixir of Love, about Rajab Ali Khayyat's life. Or even when speakers would share something personal or a story or something, that would always resonate most with me. And so I thought, with my children's permission, obviously, that if I shared something along the pages that was real and true, it would have more of an impact than just coming from like a textbook-y or kind of preachy style.
That's interesting. So you had to get their approvals in advance of publication.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I've seen some of the stories in there, and I think the particular one about the cat is probably most personal to me because of how much I love cats. But so it's interesting because a lot of the times when we think about a parenting book, the focus is on upbringing the child. It's the discipline that's focused into the child. Very rarely do you imagine a parenting book which is focused on the parent or on the mother. Was that something you were conscious of as you went through this journey of saying, I'm writing something for parents, but it's not in the traditional sense of how parenting needs to be?
I was conscious of that because in my parenting journey, along with many kind of incidences of trial and error and learning from parenting books myself, you realize that children don't come with instruction manuals, and whilst you're trying to mold them into how you think they should be, a lot of it is about learning, and learning about parenting, but also learning about yourself. That's the first time you hear yourself sounding like your own parents, and you realize how much of an impact they had on you. And it's not until you hear yourself, that you realize, and you start to maybe think about how you were parented, or whether that is actually the way to go about it now with your children, So yeah, a lot of things. It made me question a lot of things, and think about my own aptitude, my own readiness, my own personal growth. So yeah, it wasn't so much about molding into the children into anything. It's more, the learning journey that comes with it.
So can you give us an overview of the book itself? Obviously, the title is 50 Quranic Comforts. Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned in the introduction, your advice is not necessarily to read this in a traditional way, which is cover to cover. Mm-hmm. A person may open it up and jump from chapter to chapter. But yet, still there is some coherence to it, because chapter 1 is about love and everything emanating from love, and it all comes after that. So what's the overview of the book for someone who hasn't read it, and how would you want a person to approach the reading of this book?
Okay, so we structured the book in a way whereby it would be accessible specifically to busy mums or busy parents, knowing that as mothers of young children, you don't have time to pick up a whole book and read it cover to cover. You barely get time to get through the paper or your Instagram feed or whatever it is. So it was designed not to be read cover to cover, and that someone could just pick up the book and flick to a chapter and read it as a standalone chapter that wasn't linked to a chapter before or nor the chapter after. So each of the 50 chapters starts with an ayah of the Quran, followed by thoughts about the ayah or personal anecdotes that it relates to, and it always ends with a short dua from our tradition that links up to that chapter. And then there's bullet points, kind of questions for reflection, and then space left for parents to jot down their own thoughts or their own ideas about that particular topic or their own challenges. Because I personally found writing to be so therapeutic and cathartic. When I was kind of, journaling and things, I thought that would be the best way to kind of draw inspiration from the Quran. Because at the end of the day, it's about the Quran. And I've tried to cover topics from, postnatal depression to dealing with anger and frustration to single parenthood, social media, lots of different things. And also it gives space for the reader to maybe even disagree with my view of things, so they can write down their thoughts and maybe pass on their wisdom to their children later on. So it's something for them to keep and actually make it their own.
To me, it's amazing that the Quran, or the way in which you've introduced each chapter so Quranically, and then allowed some very contemporary thoughts and experiences to come off the back of that, shows just how beautiful the Quran is in terms of the mother's experience, or a feminine experience of life. Normally, we hear so much about the male counterparts of prophets, messengers, Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And of course, we do have these great women of the Islamic history, but it's often in relation to men, or in relation to their husband, or in relation to their children. Whereas from the starting point, this provides us an archetypal experience of so many things that is going to occur in a mother's life. So I found that very important as a reader myself, trying to be able to navigate the Quran. So what were the challenges that you faced when writing this, other than having to get permission from the kids for the anecdotes?
Well, firstly, the self-motivation of actually, the way I mentioned how I actually sat on it for ages and procrastinated. So, just the action of writing took ages. But the main challenges I faced, and you hear this from many, and I only came to realize this afterwards when speaking to other female authors or female entrepreneurs, that the challenges come from the lower self, so it was the constant self-doubt that would creep in, telling me that I wasn't good enough to write a book, or, who was I to talk about parenting when I hadn't been a parent I'd only been a parent for a few minutes, really. Also the vulnerability of putting myself out there, so sharing my fears, sharing my stresses, even my mistakes, with the view that it might help someone along the way. So those kind of things were very daunting. towards the end, I even asked Desin, my publisher, if we could publish it under a pseudonym, because I was so scared to put it out there. And I said, can't we just say it's by a group of sisters?
Right.
So one chapter can be by Khadija and one can be by Asiya. And she was like, well, no, we can't do that because that's not true. And she firmly believed that anonymity would not help anybody. That people needed to be real. So that, I think that was probably the most challenging aspect for me was,
Where did you find then the strength, other than Sister Tehseen, where did you find the strength then to overcome some of those doubts that were creeping in? Because everything here is so Quranic. Did you then have to go back into the Quran to find that strength? Where did it come from? Do you have a particular verse or set of verses that you can refer to in those moments that gave you that encouragement?
So it's reminding myself that what I'm putting out there is simply, and what I want for the book is simply for people to realize that the Quran is so accessible. It's just giving people a different lens with which to approach the Quran. And even now when I read it, it's the Quranic verses that stand out, and that I'd like people to take away that this book is just a signpost to something much, much greater. And so that's what gave me the strength, that it's not about what I've written or what I've shared, or that's just the peripheral things, and that's just fluff that fills it. Actually, it's sharing ayahs of the Quran and teaching and kind of imparting to people how to approach the Quran. And so the Quran would speak for itself, and kalimatullahi al-ulya, Allah's words supersede anything else, and that with the correct intention, there's no reason why it can't be put out there. So the Quran is what does it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So I'm going to mention to our audience that we do have live polls coming out, questions that are available now for us to be able to be answered and put to Sister Nazmina. So please feel free to ask those questions live on Slido, and where they fit into the conversation, I will ask them during our dialogue, or at the end, then we will put them to Sister Nazmina where we see appropriate. Now, what I want to be able to start with is thinking about the book as a gift to the space where families sit within the community. Different books of different natures might be academic, might be tafasir, whatever they might fit into, whatever category. But just taking a step back to this, to me, this seems like there is a role for an understanding of family development and how we need to contribute to that particular space where often young mothers are left behind in the community or kind of sidelined for whatever reason. It might be just the thoughts of screaming kids coming to mosque, or mums not being able to get to mosque because it just takes, you can't get a child ready. It doesn't work like that. You want to get out the house at 7:30, they may not be ready till 8:15. You don't have the same schedules really as you do as an independent person. So my thoughts are that this actually is in this space. So the poll question I'm going to put out now to the audience, and then I would like you to come back in on this now, and then maybe we can review it as the polls start to come in. The question I'm going to ask now to the audience on the polls is, do you feel there is enough provision of programs in the community for families with young children? So I'm sure we're going to have many young parents, mums especially, watching this. What do you feel about the opportunities that are available for families with young children in the community space? And you can also give us your comments and feedback on how you think that can develop. So based upon that and based upon the book, so now I put this first question to you. Do you feel that there is enough provision of programs in the community specifically for families with young children? And as a second point to that, what tips would you share for new mums to build their own sense of communities within the wider community? What about in a world where the curated social media life, which you talk about in the book, is something starkly different to the real world that young mums are in? If you can just think about some of these points. I know I've asked 2 or 3 different questions. We can take them one by one, inshallah. So the first one was, do you feel that there is enough provision of programs in the community for families with young children?
So I personally, again, having grown up in this community, I feel like, especially recently, there has been plenty for, and there is plenty for families with young children, in that, for example, there's more and more provision for children to be able to sit in the main hall with their parents if they're not kind of screaming and crying. We've got early programs. So, for example, the whole month of Ramadan, we've got my auntie, having a Ramadan program for mothers and children so that they can benefit, from the Quran and the ad'iyah and everything, as they would if they came at night, and yet they can still go home and put their kids to bed at their normal time and things like that. Same as the month of Muharram. So, and then you've got, we've got various sporting events and programs like that, SJ festivals, and so I feel like as far as our community goes, alhamdulillah, I feel like we do. Obviously, there's going to be logistical issues there, space, having to lug heavy car seats from the car park, not enough car parking spaces, having to schedule programs after 8 o'clock, so after the working day and things like that. Those I feel are inevitable. But in terms of how much our community tries, I feel like we have, alhamdulillah, way more facilities and accommodation for parents and children than many, many others, including even parenting workshops run by, people like yourself and Masma Bai that we've benefited from. At the same time, however, I do feel like it's important for mothers, especially mothers of young children, to have a smaller community of fellow mums around them for support, where they're not just recipients of a lecture, or where they're not kind of just taking their kids along so they get used to mosque and sit in the baby room and kind of almost in a way get sidelined, where they're actively nurturing these bonds with fellow mums. And in the book I refer to it, it's a term that's been coined as mirror mums. And the reason why I chose that is because I really like the hadith of the Prophet that talks about how a believer is the mirror of a fellow believer. And I always felt it was so apt for the ideal relationship between fellow mum friends, because a mirror never lies, a mirror doesn't judge, it doesn't exaggerate your reflection or distort the truth. It doesn't fix your makeup or your face for you, but it lets you do it yourself. It doesn't have a memory, so it doesn't kind of keep track of your flaws beyond the present moment. It reflects back only if it's clean itself. And so I felt like, these are the kind of friends that I've grown up, especially as a mother, appreciating around me. They're the people, who've made me stronger as a person, or who've kind of inspired me, and who we can learn from. And, regardless of what's happening at mosque, they're people who hold you accountable. And I think it's so important to have close bonds of friendship like that with other practicing mums, who don't judge you and who accept you as you are and who are in the same boat. And so as far as tips go, I think it helps a lot to find mums like that around common interests, around people around, when you have children of the same age, or if you attend the same extracurricular classes together, or you're part of the same book club, for example. And it does take effort, no doubt, to make the first step, or to establish such bonds, or to set up a WhatsApp group, or to invite someone around for tea, and maintaining contact, in times like this through Zoom calls and virtual games nights or whatever it is. But I think it's important within a wider community to have smaller communities or smaller groups, where mothers can explore their parenting and almost their identities.
Do you feel like there's a notion that every parent feels the need to be super mom or super dad? So in chapter 16 of the book, which is titled Help is at Hand, and the verse of Quran that you comment on or reflect on is from Surah Al-Baqarah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Mata Nasrullah, Ala inna Nasrullahi qareeb. When will the help of God come? Which may be how many times a parent is feeling. Allah responds, now surely the help of Allah is near. When we limit this to a theological understanding just about Imma alayhimus salam, and we just think, oh, it's about the 12th Imam, we never really bring it into our own world. What you write is, it is okay to ask for help. It is not a weakness to need the help of a spouse, friend, in-laws, or neighbors. God has gifted us with these people for a reason, and the adage that it takes a village to raise a child drips with wisdom. So then you talk about, how it's important to ask someone for help. So now if this means asking my sisters or parents to babysit, or asking a neighbor to pick up a few groceries when she goes to Costco, or a football dad to give my son a lift back, I don't hesitate. So this mirroring that you talk about, these mirror communities, as I go from chapter to chapter in the book, it stands out to me. I can see this as a central theme of what you want to be able to put across. Is that something that you find is a central problem for young mums? The kind of the curated image of being super mom and having everything perfectly curated, ready to go on Facebook or go on Instagram?
Definitely. I feel like, especially after publication of the book, I've had a lot of feedback from mothers who feel number one, a sense of isolation, especially mums whose families are not here, so they've got married from abroad and their families are back, I don't know, in Canada or Dar es Salaam, wherever they are, so they don't have their mothers or their sisters to reach out to. And many of them do feel that sense of loneliness, or that sense that maybe in the wider community they haven't grown up here, so they don't feel that immediate sense of belonging until and unless they make the effort to kind of build these bonds around. It doesn't come, naturally. And secondly, what you mentioned about social media, yes, you're very right in calling it carefully curated. And it is definitely different to real life, and the pressure is there to be a super mum. Many sisters have spoken to me saying they are left feeling quite inadequate or lacking in confidence when they see fellow parents' social media accounts, or how some mums just seem to have it all together, and they're, goddesses in the kitchen, they homeschool their kids, they set up all sorts of activities, they have amazing video and photo editing skills on top of that. In the background, the decor is amazing. Yep.
What they don't see is the children spitting up and the fight.
None of that. And they can just about, and you're left feeling like I can just about do the bare minimum. And there is that feeling of needing to keep up with the Joneses. You don't feel so adequate and artsy and crafty, and maybe have no baking skills, and and things like that. So
that's on the job.
Yeah. So so in the book I talk about how to get over that, how to not keep up with the Joneses, and how to focus on the talents that God has given you, how to focus on what's on your plate, and things like that. And it's a real struggle to do that. And yeah, social media does not make it easy at all.
You talked about this mirrors, or these mirror communities, mirror mums.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about setting up WhatsApp groups. You talked about not feeling that you can't reach out to people. Is there anything else that we can do to be able to create those mini communities within the community? Because the central question was, do we have enough programs? And we're arguing, yes, we have enough coming from the mosque. What we need to do is for our own selves now to be able to bridge that gap. What else can some of these young parents do? And keeping in mind, some of our audience will also not just be mums, but also fathers as well.
So like I mentioned, things around common interests, that's always good, because you've already got something in common, or something to talk about, or a common interest or a vantage point that's important. And obviously children of the same age would naturally kind of play together and hang out together and So that those kind of things do come naturally. In my own circles, book clubs have worked wonders, because it also allows you to explore your personality as you. And you're not just meeting up for play dates, and you're not just limited to talking about your kids all the time, where you're able to explore, interests that are personal to you as a person before you became a mother, and, aside from just parenting. So
Right.
I think that's also really important.
Beyond just that one element of your life.
Yeah, beyond just that one element and one label, where maybe you even have an unwritten rule that you don't only read parenting books, so things like that are kind of conducive to personal growth.
Yeah.
Even if it's something like an art class or anything whereby you're with like-minded people, people from the community, people who kind of share maybe the same background as you, maybe share the same language as you, or share the same, from the same kind of demographic, but not necessarily dictated by what's programmed in the community. Right. So you get to meet people beyond just Jai and Fatiha at the end of the lecture, where you're running and your children are already wired and you're, desperate to go home.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that's important.
Desperate to go home after Majlis.
And also I think this situation that we're in right now, this coronavirus situation, has really highlighted to people that intrinsic, inbuilt, fitri need for a community. I think even the introverts amongst us have realized that actually we are very social beings. And
I don't want to speak on their behalf, but yes.
Well, I am one of them, so
you speak on their behalf then.
But that this need for social interaction is inbuilt, and it's not until you don't have it that you realize how important it is to you.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So so we've had some polling results on this first question. Do you feel there is enough provision in the community for families with young children? 41% have said yes, more than enough. 18% there might be, but they're not well advertised, which is something important for us to be able to think about as a community. 6% yes, but the timings are not suitable. And a good 35% said no. So if you feel like commenting a little bit further beyond just the poll, feel free to write it in as a comment, not as a question, and we can try to read those out wherever we find space to be able to do so. So moving on back to the book, inshallah, you mention in the book the difference between stretching versus pulling mothers. So as a reader, it appears that you're talking about a fine line between these two terms. Can you explain what you mean by these two terms and share some insights for the listeners about why you've talked about those two things and how you reach or how that develops as a theme within the book?
Okay. So again, it stemmed from this feeling that I would have when I felt like I was spread too thin between everything that I had to do. So my parenting duties, as well as teaching, as well as, kind of keeping up with other things that needed to be done, etc. And sometimes I would feel like I was stretched beyond capacity, or that I as a person find it very difficult to say no to things. And so I'd feel like I was doing something, but doing it resentfully, or sense a lot of resistance inside. And then I came across this hadith of Imam Rida alayhi salam, where he actually describes this, and he says hearts are such that they either stretch forward or they pull away. And he said that, and so when they stretch forward, they're active, and they see and they understand and they grow. But when they resist, they become dim and weary. Therefore, make the most of them when they stretch forward, and leave them when they're feeble and weary. And I realize that it's a very fine line. It's so important to stretch yourself outside your comfort zone, so as not to become complacent. And that area directly around your comfort zone is where you feel a sense of exhilaration, where you may even feel fear to kind of go beyond that. But generally, it's a good place to be because it kind of makes you work harder, and it takes you out of complacency if you're, when you're not doing the same thing over and over. But going sometimes beyond that, or going beyond that too often, that stretch then becomes a pull. A stretch is something that you do willfully with intention. A pull is where you do it out of obligation, or you do it,
versus pulling the muscle.
Exactly.
Well, you're in control as to how much stretch and force you put. Pulling the muscle, it was out of your control. The muscle snapped.
The muscle snapped, exactly. And there's resistance there, and there's resentment, and things like that. And I often felt that sometimes I was doing things just to please people, or out of a sense of obligation, where I was neither benefiting myself nor God. I may, kind of tell myself that yes, I'm doing the right thing, but as a mother, I personally felt that it was very important to learn how to say no, to take on the right things that stretched me and didn't pull me, and I also found that it was possible to turn a pull into a stretch with the right intention, to actually correct the intention, make it fi sabilillah, but it had to be devoid of resentment, to kind of shed the resentment that came along with it and fully do it willingly and turn a pull into a stretch. So this is where this idea of stretching and pulling comes from. But it's something that, especially when you live in a community or you have other responsibilities besides your children, where you have work to tend to and household duties and maybe elderly parents to take care of, or a number of things where you have to prioritize, and you have to sometimes say no and put things on the back burner, and give your attention and your time and your energy where it's needed most.
So chapter 28 in the book is titled "I Did Not Sign Up for This." And it speaks about Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. And in there, you mention in your comments, when we read between the lines in the Quran, the verses indicate to us that Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam did not remain a victim to whatever fate's hand dealt him. And again, that gives a lot of encouragement and inspiration to someone who's between being pulled and between being stretched. And you mentioned that hadith from Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, and there are other narrations that tell us about when a person is spiritually alive, when they feel like they're ready and their heart is involved, then throw yourself into worship. But when you feel very tired, then just do the minimal that's required from you. So is this kind of along the lines that you're going with in terms of the relationship between self-development, the parenting skill of knowing when to push yourself and when to kind of take a step back? Is that where you're going with that thought?
Yes, I think so, because primarily we're responsible for little ones in this role. It's not just us. And sometimes by giving of ourselves disproportionately in one area, we often end up taking away from those who need us most. So the risk is that we're doing, by doing a service in one place, we're doing a disservice somewhere else. So maintaining that balance is very important.
So how would you recognize that? It's brilliant, the theory or the point that you make. Practically, have you got an experience from your life that you want to share with us on when you've recognized that giving too much here or is affecting you not being able to give here?
Well, there's many examples, but usually I would identify it by how I felt. So it was always, if I felt that I was taking on something by sheer obligation, simply because I didn't know how to say no, or I felt bad to say no, and then I would resent it afterwards, or it left me feeling depleted rather than energized.
Right.
Or that I came away feeling as if I hadn't gained anything from whatever it was, apart from potentially thawab, it's important that, we see thawab as more than just brownie points that are accumulating somewhere in gold coins. It's not Mario Kart where you just kind of just accumulate. The thawab has to be felt as spiritual growth,
But then at the same time, how then do you balance the number of obligations that come to you as a person, but also as a mother? How do you balance those two issues of genuinely feeling like you're participating in that in order to gain growth and experience from it, yet also realizing there are obligations upon you?
So again, I think it came down to prioritizing, right? Of course, everybody has obligations, and our children aren't the be-all and end-all. It's also wrong to make everything revolve around the children, right? We've been warned against that in the Quran, that our children are a test, and it's not healthy to just make everything about the children. Everybody has children and they grow up, and it's not they're not the be all and end all, but at the same time to bear in mind that they need us present, not just physically but also mentally, to be there for them. And so it's a case of prioritizing where the obligations are most needed, and doing that accordingly.
So some of the questions are coming in, and there's one or two really brilliant questions which I'm going to come to next. So please keep sending those questions in, guys, because we will get to them inshallah. But I want to mention a comment that has come in. And it is from a person in Qatar. So it shows us how wide this book has reached, that someone is making this comment. So a person mentions, I just want to comment what a real comfort this book is, which of course is after the title, 50 Quranic Comforts. I just want to comment what a real comfort this book is. I have read many parenting books, but Quranic Comforts is by far the best.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah for that. I just wanted to read out that comment. So I've got a question, and then there's a question from a member of our audience which is going to link to it. So I'll just put my question first and then bring in the audience's question as well. So I want to ask about how you advise mums to juggle all the different strategies and advices that are given by family members, friends, bloggers, and this curated world outside of us, all the latest trends that come to us and fads, and how do we balance all of those whilst maintaining an Islamic foundation and yet still living with the times? What's the solution or solutions to that?
I think it's very important to adopt an approach of flexibility and moderation in everything. So when I say flexibility, meaning that to not rigidly assume that just because things have been done a certain way in the past, that's how they are to be done, right? And sometimes we may have that from parents or in-laws, that they brought us up a certain way and we turned out fine, and so what, why do we have to reinvent the wheel with their grandchildren? Or and we have, alhamdulillah, the hadith of Imam Ali alayhi salam talking about how our children are born in a different time to us, and to raise them differently to how we were raised. So that's very important to bear in mind, that times do change and psychologies change, and to be flexible from one angle, but also to have moderation in everything that we do, because Islam is a religion of moderation. And we have to be, it's important to use the aql in everything, right? Alhamdulillah that we live in the age of the internet where research is at our fingertips, anecdotal research, evidential research for stuff. And so it's not difficult to consult actual experts in a field, and do a little more research rather than follow any one person or any one influencer or whatever the trend is, however influential they may be. It's to remember that people are fallible, right? However great a parent you may look up to on social media or on Instagram, people are fallible, they make mistakes, they curate their posts, they, everything is kind of built to look a certain way. They are probably followers of others themselves, right? So in the Quran, Allah says, أَفَمَنْ يَهْدِي إِلَى الْحَقِّ أَحَقُّ أَنْ يُتَّبَعَ أَمَّا لَا يَهِدِّي إِلَّا أَنْ يُهْدَى. Is he who guides to the truth more worthy of being followed than who himself does not go aright unless he is guided? So most of the people we follow are themselves followers, right? So it's very, very important to use our aql, to go to the source of things, to do a little bit of research, to acknowledge that there is a right and wrong way to do things. There are yardsticks not for us to judge others by, but for us to hold to a certain standard. And we have to use our good judgment and intellect, and also the fact that we have role models to learn from. Alhamdulillah that we have amazing role models in the form of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And yes, okay, in the history books it doesn't say how Sayyidah Fatima sleep trained, or what age she introduced solids, or how she dealt with terrible twos, but it just takes a little reading between the lines into how they dealt with things in general, right? We can glean their general approach from their attitude of kindness, from their attitude of respect for a human being, even a small child, from their aversion to anything that even remotely resembles dhulm, for example, right? And so it takes a little bit of astuteness and wisdom and good judgment as we navigate parenthood, and also to have confidence in our own instincts. Our children didn't come with instruction manuals, but Allah has given mothers a very strong fitrah as to what's right and wrong. And sometimes by listening to all these other voices, we squash that gut feeling or the inner fitrah that Allah has bestowed on us. And so also to have confidence in that the mother does know best deep down, and and to go with that.
Beautiful. Ahsan. So one of the questions comes off the back of this question that I posed about the different strategies that you have to juggle everything that's thrown at you, advice, people's experiences, the curated worlds that exist out there. So the question from one of our audience is, how do you handle seeing others being better parents or handling situations better than you and the guilt attached to that?
Okay. And again, this goes very much back to being exposed more than ever now to how other people do things. A mere few years ago, people would have been happy handling a situation because all they were exposed to was how they handle things in their own home, maybe how their best friend or how their sister does it, how their parents did it. But now we're exposed to a massive world outside where we have a window into how different people do different things, and it can be very overwhelming when you see people being better parents somehow, and you see people doing things differently, but often we look at them with the eye that they are better than us. Firstly, it's to remember that no one can parent our children better than ourselves, just like we cannot parent anybody else's children better than they can, right? So our children have been designed for us, and it's difficult when you see people managing to sail through what you find very difficult, especially if the children that we have maybe special needs, or they have, you have a baby that's especially colicky, or one that's resistant to being reasoned with, or a number of different things, where you simply cannot compare your child or your parenting to somebody else's. But comparison is something that comes very naturally to us as parents, as just, it's in our nature to compare. But Imam Jaffer Sadiq has taught us a beautiful technique when we find ourselves comparing. And he teaches us to, rather than look up to people and then have that sense of unworthiness or guilt or whatever it may be, to look down at those who are worse off than us. Because then it makes us appreciate what we have, and also it makes us stretch to think, well, how can I help them? Or thank God I have what I have. And that's the thing. So social media has us believe that we're all in the same boat, that we're the same, that our situations are the same. But actually, you know, there's stark differences between people. And it's not a level playing field. I mean, if we just look at this situation that we're in now, and I was reading some of these things talking about how coronavirus is the great leveler, and it doesn't differentiate between rich and poor, and it can strike anybody. But in actual fact, it's not a great leveler, and we are not in the same boat. You know, people from ethnic minority backgrounds or working class families are far, far worsely affected. And I read yesterday about, you know, someone had put this anecdote of a storm, that it's like we're all stuck in a storm, but we're not all in the same boat. So some of us only experience the sprinkling of the storm. We've got the luxury of being able to watch it from our windows. We can watch the storm from our windows. So we complain of distance from our loved ones, not being able to attend mosque and social gatherings and funerals. And our pantries are pretty much okay. Many of us can still work from home. We can spend
swimming pools.
Exactly. Spend quality time with our kids, hone our baking skills every day, still afford more things. We have credit and debit cards to be able to order things online, right? We're not in the same boat as others who actually have to be in a boat in the storm. The key workers and NHS staff who have no choice but to walk out in the thunder and rain and brave the
underground packed carriage of 100 people.
Brave the elements, get drenched every day, still send their kids to school and feel guilty that they're not at home doing amazing puzzles and painting things and, you know, chalking the sidewalk and things with their children, and they have to still go to work and face risks. And then you've got yet others who are in completely different boats, where they face like the harshest brunt of the storm, right? The hurricane-like winds that are out of their control, that rip away their livelihood, their health, the life of their loved ones or their parents, and they face loss after loss. So yes, we're all in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat.
Yeah.
And that's the thing to remember in parenting as well. It seems like, you know, I should have it all together because my friend who just lives down the road has it all together and her son is the same age as my son. Or, you know,
in reality, they're probably looking at you going, wow, she has it all together. I wish I was like her.
Exactly. But social media shows us the stories from people we follow, people we like, similar-minded people, people who maybe vote the same as us, live in the same neighborhoods, come from similar situations, and yet reality can be starkly different at home. Yeah. So it's so important to focus on what's on our own plate, our own children, and potentially at those who are worse off than us. So then we can be grateful for our situation, lend a helping hand to someone who's worse off than us, and there is always someone who's worse off than us. And, you know, when we're taught about giving sadaqah to ward off bala, right? Sometimes the bala is the bala of comparison, and the sadaqah is lending the helping hand, which is what wards off that bala of comparison and jealousy and guilt and all of that.
Insightful way of interpreting the matter of sadaqah and the response that you get from it. So we have a second poll that we wish to be able to put out, which is directly related to what you've just been commenting on, the question that came in previously. So the question we're going to put out on the poll is, extensive use of social media makes me feel lacking as a parent, or that I am somehow not doing enough. So the idea is to be able to see whether you agree or disagree with that question and to what extent. So we're putting that poll out now. and we're going to return back to some of the questions and comments that are coming in. So one particular question was about the book being, or to what extent that the book can actually be for non-Muslim potential readers. So if someone wanted to give this as a gift or as a recommendation to a non-Muslim reader, do you feel that this is something that could go their way as well?
So I don't feel that the content is at all something that they wouldn't be able to appreciate. I think so. I've got a couple of Jewish friends who've read it cover to cover, and they felt that it was relevant and something that they could resonate with. Obviously, they can't read. The book also includes Arabic, but because the translation is there, that should be no problem. And maybe if there were a friend that could ask you, if they were a close enough friend that they could refer to you, if they come across kind of names of people, so I've mentioned people like Sayyidah Fatima or Lady Zainab or Asiya, the wife of Pharaoh, or, people that they've not come across in their tradition, that they could potentially ask you about them. But I don't see why somebody couldn't appreciate it. And whilst publishing, we did try to kind of include as many translations of words rather than Arabic words directly.
One of the questions that I had for myself as a male reader, and I messaged this to you, and I said that from my perspective, I get an insight about a little bit of femininity, or I get some empathy for something that I may have missed, because of course we're coming from a different gender, we're coming from a different life experience. So from my perspective as a male reader, I kind of gleaned some of that when I was going through the chapters. One chapter in particular, chapter 24, which is titled "You've Broken My Trust," which something is a very real world relationship builder and relationship breaker as well. So even though the title is 50 Quranic Comforts for Mums, to what extent is this book not just available to, say, non-Muslim audience, but to a male readership, or to a father, or to a husband? And what should they expect to gain if they decide to pick up this book?
Okay, so originally we were planning to have the word parents in the title. It was supposed to be 50 Quranic Comforts for Parents. And as we were going through the editing process, it just felt like I was having to change a lot to make it gender neutral, where I had written it from a very kind of personal perspective as a mum. So that was the only reason that we kept it from mums, is because I couldn't speak for dads as a mum, because it was written from the vantage point of a personal journey. So we decided to keep it for mums, but content-wise, there's nothing there that makes it exclusively for mums other than the fact that the author is a mum. So I think that it's just as accessible to dads. And so for them, I think reading it to appreciate the challenges that the mothers of their children go through is a secondary reason. I don't see why they couldn't primarily appreciate it simply for the Quranic content and the parenting content that there is in there, then as a secondary reason to appreciate what what the mothers of their children go through. So it's just as relevant to dads. It's not something that's, I mean, there may be a few chapters there, maybe, something on, I don't know, postnatal depression, but actually that's something that fathers should be very aware of.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, there's actually nothing there that fathers couldn't benefit from.
Okay, so there's two comments that will come in. I'll read those out, and then I'm going to move towards our last two questions.
Okay.
From me, and then we have a couple of questions from our audience. So the comments are, I think the programs for kids age 5+ are good, including sports, early programs, etc. But until you get sent to downstairs, you don't feel part of the community. So it's a valid comment of how sometimes practically people feel in the community. Another comment is, there are many programs for mums and kids, but not so much for dads and kids. And I actually think that's a very interesting point, that maybe one day we can pick up on, inshallah. So looking back at the polls that we have, we've put out the question about the extent of social media, whether it has an impact on you and make you feel lacking as a parent, or that you are somehow not doing enough. So to have a look at some of the results that's come in, 69% of the respondents have said sometimes, yes, it does have that negative impact. 23% says not at all, it inspires me. And 8% says I'm an influencer myself, which is very interesting, because maybe that's a conversation we can have with someone in the future. Tell us about how you are an influencer and what that actually means. So please carry on answering that poll. We can come back to it at the end of the discussion, inshallah. So the last couple of questions that I have for you is in regards to now someone taking the book away and what you want to kind of leave the conversation with the audience thinking about. In a nutshell, what one thing would you like mums and parents to take away from your work?
If I had to boil it down to one thing, I'd say I'd like parents to take away the fact that the Quran calls itself a shifa, that it calls itself a cure for what's in the chests. And often, you know, what we feel in the chest is that sense of overwhelm, of confusion, of, you know, anything. And the Quran says it's a shifa, it's an intimate friend, it's a source of support when you need it. And it really does have answers. It takes a little practice to read it and to derive that practical benefit. But that's what I would want parents to remember, that it's so accessible when you make it a habit to read it and to open it for your parenting needs. I think that would be it.
Lovely. Thank you so much. So going back to some of the questions from our audience, the first one is, do you have any practical tips for you being a good mirror to your friends and community? We talked about you building mirrors with others. How can you be a good mirror to someone else?
So the first thing is obviously not being proactive and reaching out, right? Not always being the recipient or waiting for other people to initiate, which I can't say I've been amazing at doing. I've got friends who are much better at me at initiating contact and maintaining contact, organizing gatherings and things like that than me. So I hold my hands up and say I'm not that good a mirror mum when it comes to, you know, actually building these communities. But I think one major thing that has to be established and has to be shed is judgmentalism. I think it's really, really important to make fellow mothers feel comfortable, where they're in a space where they can be fully themselves, they're not judged. Then, you know, they've got somebody who would tell them if they were doing something wrong in the gentlest way possible, in secret, and who has their backs, and yet who would not judge them. I think that's very important, and that's what keeps people from being themselves, and that's what keeps people from sharing their innermost feelings or sharing their vulnerabilities or inadequacies, is where they feel they're going to be judged, right? Especially, you know, in a community setting where you feel like you have to kind of show that you've got it all together, and, you know, there's nothing cracking at the seams and nothing leaking from you know. So I think that's very important, that if you can find that empathy and reaching out to fellow mums in a non-judgmental way, I think that's the crux of it.
I thought that was a really good question from someone who titled themselves a dad. So you have a lot of people watching and appreciating your comments. So my last question is, how do you recommend going about reading the book in a way which derives maximum benefit? And where can the book be purchased? Okay.
So now today, you know, when just in the lead up to this interview, I picked up the book after a long time of not having picked it up myself. And when I was reading through the anecdotes that I had penned down about my children and their funny stories and their antics, it actually filled me with so much joy, remembering those things. And also the insights that I had gained along the journey that I'd forgotten. And I would highly recommend that the best way to get maximum benefit is use the empty spaces and the bullet points to actually journal your own thoughts, your ideas, your differences of opinion maybe. Because I think it would make a wonderful gift to your children when they start their parenting journeys to be able to chart what you went through. And maybe when they come to it, they'll have a different way of parenting to yours altogether. But it'll be such a good reminder of their little anecdotes and what you went through while they were growing up, all guided by these Quranic ayat. So that was the original intention when I wrote it, was that it would be a keeper of a book that you wouldn't lend out to anybody else, that you'd have your own personal jots in, and then gift it to your own children.
Wow, very interesting. So we have a follow-up question a question that helps us to follow up on that comment. Mm-hmm. And someone has written, it's anonymously, says, I don't have a good relationship with my parents. What do I do if my mum hits me using discipline? So you've talked about having something that you pass down to your parents. From the opposite side of the relationship, how can then something be passed on to their own parents, such as the communication that needs to come from a child to a mum?
Gosh, that's a hard one. So there's various places in the Quran where, in fact, there's more emphasis that the Quran places on the parental relationship the other way around. So from us to our parents, rather than parent to child. And there's more kind of by way of command, and it's, referring back to the verse that you actually read out in the beginning, وَوَصَيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ, that we've enjoined on man about his parents and that his mother carried him. So there's much more that's out there about how to treat our parents. As far as, physical abuse and things like that go, it's important for that to be addressed. Because there's, to tolerate any form of dhulm is not good, right? We're taught in Islam, la tadlim wa la tudlam. Don't oppress and do not be oppressed. So, but it depends on your age, and it depends on circumstances and things like that. But definitely, there should be help got for situations that involve actual physical abuse. Having said that, there's a lot in the Quran that talks about respect of parents, not saying so much as an uff to them, right? So uff would be like a big sigh when they tell you something, or rolling your eyes, or things like that, of lowering the wings of humility and mercy to our parents. And in the verse that you recited, where it talks about respecting parents, and the reason it gives is that the mother carried him, or carried the child, with strain upon strain. That alone, and the fact that the weaning took 30 months. So when you think about the carrying and the weaning, that alone, Allah says, warrants us praying for them, being grateful for them, respecting them, not to mention the raising, the educating, the sheltering, the clothing, the taxing here and there, the extracurricular activities. That's something else, right? Not even, Allah doesn't even say they raised you as a Muslim, so respect them, right? They gave you the gift of deen, so respect them. None of that. So simply by virtue of the fact that your mother bore you and weaned you, both parents become deserving of respect. And it's emphasized quite heavily. Except it says there that حتى إذا بلغ 40 سنة قال ربي أوزعني أن أشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علي وعلى والدي. He says it's not until he reaches 40 years of age that he raises his hands in dua and says, my Lord, inspire me to be grateful to you and to my parents. So maybe sometimes it makes me wonder, is it until we reach the age of 40 that we truly appreciate our parents? Is that significant, in that it's not until we become parents and we reach a certain level of maturity that we will truly understand and appreciate what they've done for us. And so maybe there's a lot to take away. I think I've got about 2 or 3 different chapters of the book actually, that talk about that other relationship, the reciprocal one from child to parent, and how much importance God gives it.
So some of the verses of the Quran that I find most amazing about child to parent in Surah Maryam, from chapter 19 verses 42 onwards, and there's a moment where Ibrahim alayhi salam speaks to his father. Of course, it's not his biological father, but someone who's been in his stead, his uncle bringing him up, and his father actually threatens to stone Ibrahim alayhi salam. He says, if you don't desist, lam tantahi la arjumannaka wahjurni maliya. If you don't desist, I'm going to stone you. And Ibrahim alayhi salam responds, qala salamun alayk, peace be upon you. Sa'astaghfiru laka rabbi, I'm going to seek forgiveness for you for what you have done. Innahu kana bi hafiyya, my Lord has always been gracious to me, therefore I expect nothing other than for him to be gracious to you. So there's this beautiful set of relationships that you can find in the Quran, which gives you a guidance as to how to respond. But of course, if anyone is feeling like they need an ear to speak to, you can always contact us at alim@hujjat.org, or you can speak to anyone in the community who you feel that you have trust to be able to do so, or any of the organizations, professional organizations that are available to you, be they Muslim or non-Muslim charities that may be able to help you. And we pray that your situation improves, inshallah, with the advice that Sister Nazmina has just given to us. So we want to draw this discussion to a conclusion, and there's a couple of points that have been raised. We actually have one person who has said, from Canada, they say, thank you very much for an outstanding, excellent book for all parents. So we have a wonderful comment there. We also have a question that asks, do you have any other books that we can look forward to reading? Are you working on anything else at the moment?
So I'm working on a couple of translations at the moment, and inshallah will be published soon, but nothing parenting related yet. Now I think I have to wait till my children have passed the teenage stage.
Any glimpses of what you're working on, inshallah?
Glimpses. So one's inshallah a tafsir work, translation from Arabic into English, and another is a fiqh work, an ancient scholars fiqh work.
Wonderful. Tawfiq, inshallah.
Inshallah.
One question is that what's the best way to follow the book, because there are 50 chapters. You've answered this question in depth throughout the whole talk. Can I humbly recommend, if you've joined us a little bit later, this whole discussion will be available on our YouTube page. So just continue following us and subscribe to Hujjat Stanmore YouTube page. You'll always be able to catch up on anything that you've missed. Last question, one which gives us a whole way to round off the whole discussion. If there is one piece of advice you can give to us as parents, what would that be?
I think it would be to not disregard the power, alongside what I said about the Quran and using the Quran as your first point, as your first resort, and as a place that has answers. Never underestimate the power of dua, I would say, especially when you're going through difficult times. And there are many difficult times, and I don't think any time can be underestimated, right? Something that you may find extremely and highly irritating, such as the terrible twos, or or whatever it may be, is very real. right? So never underestimate that what you're going through is little. The fact that it's bothering you and the fact that you're losing sleep over it, or that it's, you know, these are real struggles. But also don't underestimate the power of your dua as a mother. Sometimes we're so hell-bent on finding the solutions online or from people, or we try and do so much ourselves that we forget the divine help that's available to us. And that Allah so beautifully says, Ud'uni astajib lakum, right? Just call me and I'll answer you, I'll respond to you. And trusting that the response will come. And Allah says, إِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِ أَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ. I answer the call of the caller when he or she calls upon me. Not the Muslim, not the mu'min, not the one fluent in Arabic, not the one who's memorized du'as, not the perfect supermom, but the caller. And I think that's really important, especially because it's one of the ayahs of the month of Ramadan, or, you know, that comes directly after the injunction of fasting, that our du'as, our voices as mothers are very dear to Allah. And our struggles are dear to Allah. They're not ignored, they are witnessed, and they're responded to. So don't think you have to do everything by yourself. There is divine help available. Like we said, Ala inna nasrallahi qareeb. So, inshallah, I hope that helps.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So we have a comment from a sister, Fatima. Thank you for this book and for giving your time to answering our questions. We also have another comment from someone called a single parent. Being a single parent like me, this is now an increasing issue within our community. I think mentorship for children from single parent backgrounds would be a good idea. Brilliant. Thank you so much for the comments, the questions, participating in the polls. I hope this session has been of benefit to everyone. So just to remind, we are presenting the book 50 Quranic Comforts for Mums by Sister Nazmina Dhanji. And as you can see, the audience who have read it, those who are interested in reading it, there is so much positive feedback about the book. Where is the book available for us? Can you just remind?
Oh yes, I forgot about that. So it's available direct from the publisher, from Sun Behind the Cloud Publications. It's available on Amazon, and I believe it's also available as an ebook, as well as at Hujjat Bookshop. And I think a lot of the communities around England, at least Birmingham, Leicester, Peterborough, and also I believe Canada and the States also have representative bookshops that stock it.
To those of us who are local to Hujjat Stanmore, for those books that we present on this show in our book corner, if you wish to be able to email education@hujjat.org, we will be able to send that out with free postage and packaging. Not the book being free, with free postage and packaging for those people who wish to be able to email in and get it directly from Hujjat Stanmore. Thank you so much for taking time out to discuss this book with us, Sister Nazmina. A quick reminder to our audience that this is a show which is weekly, so we will see you again next week, same time, same day, inshallah, Wednesday from 4 to 5:30 p.m. We are encouraging all of our community, especially kids and youths, to send in videos of their own book reviews. I'm sure everyone is taking advantage of this extra time to be able to read something. You might have a classic, a favorite that you want to tell us about, tell the world about. Please make a 5-minute clip, send that in to av@hujjat.org, and we will play and benefit from those, inshallah. Thank you again to all of you joining us, inshallah. Stay safe, stay healthy. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you deep insight into the Quran, and for all mums, for all parents, grant them the tawfiq to fulfill all that they are hoping to be able to achieve. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, and to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our deaths. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakumullah.